Hello, seniors. Our time together is coming to a close, and I'm really sad. But I will work through my sadness. I will give you what is going to be, brace yourselves, our final lecture. This is a sum up of some of the schools of thought that I know we didn't get to together, or that we got to kind of in passing, like we did multiculturalism a little together, and then I left it in the hands of your capable substitute teacher. I wanted to review these last few topics with you and then remind you that the exit tickets are all graded. They are worth good points to you. I need any makeup work you may have from myself or Miss Kiki submitted. Your grades are due Thursday by 3, so really by Thursday morning you need to get me the work. And my juniors are handing in narratives Thursday morning, so just keep in mind that if you try to hand me in makeup work Thursday at 1 o'clock, you are cutting it so close. Like I would, if anything, submit it like late Wednesday night, and so that it's waiting for me when I log on Thursday. And please send me the email indicating to me what I'm looking for, because many of the Google programs do not send me an email saying that you've submitted late. It marks you late. I can check timestamps and stuff like that, but it's not that it tells me that you did it. So you need to tell me. You can also use the remind function. I leave that tab open and I'll get the alerts both in email and on the remind tab that you've messaged me. So they're the two fastest ways to get in touch with me, direct email and the remind function. Just sending me messages on Google, same thing. I don't necessarily get an alert that you've left a message on Google. So if I see it, I see it, but I might not see it in the time frame that you need me to see it. As I was kind of clarifying to the juniors, our school hours are 8 to 12, and those are the hours that I'm checking those emails. I'm not trying to be difficult with you. I mean, starting at about, as I told them, 11:15, I have two small humans who are pretty much sitting outside the door scratching at it like cats wanting to be let in. Like by about 12:15, 12:30, if I don't know that I have to put time aside for, say, grading, I am usually already consumed by like making lunches and stuff like that. So just let me know between the school hours how much time I need to dedicate to like doing your makeup work and stuff, so that I can clearly pose that to the people helping me with my kids. Now, that being aside, last lecture is occurring. I will be posting graduation wishes for you guys on the final day of class. So even though it's not necessarily an assignment, it is for you, and I would hope that you would care and want to see it. But last lecture, starting with multiculturalism. This was, when I was looking at like an endpoint for where I thought we'd leave off, multiculturalism was one that I was like, all right, this is a fair start and someone else could finish this fairly easily. We started with the racial divide, and you guys read Sula. Sula is interesting in that there's some crazy pants people in there. People that you don't like. I remember the last time that I read this with students, I actually read it live with them in class. So we got together every day. We sat down in a little circle, and they really made me read to them, but we read it together. And it was fun because the sort of live action of them going was hysterical. Toni Morrison, as an author, frequently likes to challenge your beliefs and expectations about Black communities. I don't know what it would be like for students of different races to read this book, but I know what it's like to read it as a white teacher, as a white lady. I'm always fascinated by the sort of reflection that she shows me of different times, of different people, of the influences on their lives, some of which I expect. That poverty plays a huge role in the lives of many of these characters. And if you had asked me to guess, like, what's going to impact everyone's behavior, poverty would be on my list. Anyone who's poor is impacted by their poverty. But Toni Morrison frequently breaks down Black communities in a way that only an insider could do and communicate the struggles specific to Black communities. It's up there for me with Zora Neale Hurston. She also does a tremendous job of breaking down communities as a speaker within the community. Toni Morrison, one of my all-time favorite writers. Now, some of you read Bluest Eye for your research papers, and I would have hoped that having that in the background and having Sula ahead of you, you were able to sort of look at both of them and look at how they framed normalcy and dysfunction, how they framed recovery, what the voices, particularly of the younger generations, were and what they looked like and what they sounded like. Because there's always a seed of hopefulness in Toni Morrison, but it can often be lost in tragedy. She is someone who writes gorgeous, beautiful, mesmerizing tragedy. And I know that's a weird way to say it. But there are books that make you happy you're sad reading them. Like you're reading them and you're like, this is the most glorious sadness I've ever experienced. I didn't understand grief or heartache or anger until I read it this way. And Toni Morrison does that. For me, Sula's not as maybe gripping as some of the other Toni Morrison books, but I had to be considerate of a length issue in terms of how many books you read in great books. Sula physically fits. It's shorter. But also it does a good job with time structures and also physical structures. There's the metaphor of living on the mountain in Sula that I find very engaging. People who literally live at the top and the bottom of the mountain. In comparison to something like The Rachel Divide, where you're looking at somebody who, we debated the term masquerade. Rachel Dolezal, born white, calling herself like trans black, wanting to take on the black identity and living that life for a while and then being called out as lying about it. We watched the documentary after it was revealed that she was not really black, she was white, and having to deal with the aftermath of that, particularly with her children, her 3 sons, one of which used to be her brother. You guys had some really awesome starter conversations with me that I imagine got better and cooler with Miss Kiki as you continued the multiculturalism unit. When you think about multiculturalism, I said it was one of the units that I wanted to make sure you got with me like you got feminism with me, because I like to give it to students because you think you've been taught it in the past, but there are sometimes inherent flaws to what you've been taught. That's not because people mean badly by designing your curriculum, but sometimes your curriculum is about fixing older errors. So like if you think about school, even not that long ago when I was in it, there were a lot of books by dead white guys. There was the dead white guy curriculum. That's what we were reading. It was like something if we had a female author. Like they were like, guys, there's a female author here. And more of them in the library. Like it was almost a secret. And they were white women. We understood that Frederick Douglass was black and he wrote some stuff, but they sort of gave us cliff notes on it. I'm not that much older than you guys either, but we were starting to get more things. We were starting to hear things like there was a dominant voice, and that dominant voice tended to be an old white guy. And we should consider that it's not the only voice. And as I got older, they got better at sort of giving us slightly different texts by slightly different people, trying to round out our reading experience. However, there's an issue with trying to fix that. And that issue tends to be that teachers or administrators who approve curriculum need to know the texts that they approve. And that's a practical matter, right? Like if you hand me a curriculum and I have to teach it and I don't know the book, I either have to get with the program and read the book, and then not only did I read it fast, but do I understand it? Do I have materials on it? How am I teaching it? But especially the higher ups, like if I hand somebody a curriculum and say, can you approve this? They need to know the books because they need to be aware of whatever potential issues are going to come up with parents or students so that they can have an articulate conversation about why we're reading this material. It happens. I mean, every year if you teach Huck Finn, you'll have at least one parent complain about teaching Huck Finn. And that's because Huck Finn uses the N-word something obscene like over 200 times. And if you don't have the words to say in a non-offensive way why we should be reading Huck Finn, you're going to wind up offending people. And the point of multiculturalism is not to offend, right? It's to educate, it's to elaborate, it's to broaden. But in trying to fix maybe kind of whitewashed curriculum, frequently you guys were getting basically books that centered around slavery or rape and abuse. And it really limited, it was sort of very like white people have done wrong to black people was the way the discussion boiled down. I've tried to instill in you maybe things that either made that a more complex statement as opposed to sort of monolithic and basic. I mean, that's an overly basic way to explain problems. And you guys now in June recapping this in the full thralls of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I think it's particularly important to say that multiculturalism should be studied and valued because it shows people how terribly complex these issues are and tries to expose to us the ways in which we take for granted our understanding of them. So it shouldn't be just simple issues that you know exist, like yes, some people oppress other people, some people are violent with other people, but also asking yourself why you believe this or why you take it to be true. Why does it bother other people? Why does it exist? And in a perfect world, we would have also seen greater diversity among the ethnicities and cultures that we read about. Because multiculturalism should not merely be a black-white discussion, but it should also be about the many different shades of brown. A couple of you tried to read Jasmine, and, you know, shockingly, the book didn't get as much play as it should have this year, but in previous years was a big fan favorite. I know my maternity leave hurt some of this. I'm very sad about that, but I'm very happy with my baby, so I don't really know that we could have done it both ways. I would prefer in the future that students saw more variety. I know that's probably one flaw that you guys had with your multiculturalism experience, is that it still was very kind of stark. But the intention was to show you greater variation and to allow for those conversations to occur. Why do I think this? What should I be thinking? Is it a problem that I think this? Or is it at least fair that I understand why I say this and why I think this? I had a lot of fun in the beginning part of our discussion with it. Multiculturalism, I usually try to either start and then go post-colonial, or I start post-colonial and go multicultural, because they tend to play with a lot of the same concepts. I always use the phrase, they play in the same sandbox. So in the sandbox of like different kinds of cultural discussion, you would kind of put like new historicism, multiculturalism, and post-colonialism in very close territory with each other for this reason. You're looking at social and political and sometimes economic impact, usually on writers, to what they are then doing, what they are producing, and how it communicates about the world that the artist is in. New historicism would do it in a very like fascinated at all the moving pieces kind of way. It's not that new historicism frequently takes sides. Like new historicism doesn't say, look at the moral value of this side. Whereas multiculturalism usually takes the side of the oppressed voice and says, we need to find a way to amplify this sound. I usually try to do memoir with this too. Like I want you guys to see voices of oppressed people who have managed to claim a tiny bit of space, and it's our job to blow it up. So where new historicism might be more neutral, multiculturalism definitely takes moral standpoints on it, right and wrong. I try very hard to be as paired back with that moral standpoint as I can with multiculturalism, because frankly, it runs the gamut. You can find theorists who are fairly middle of the road and theorists who are fairly extreme in their standpoints. And they're all claiming multicultural space. So it's not my job to necessarily tell you which of them is right and wrong, but to explain that that's what they do and that's how they read material. If you enjoy taking moral standpoints about particularly obviously the impact of race and ethnicity on what authors produce, multiculturalism's probably going to be your favorite of the different types of things we studied. Postcolonialism looks specifically at a historical standpoint, by which we had imperial rule over other countries. So where dominant European countries tended to be European. Anyway, there's a few exceptions to that, but it tended to be European. It tended really to be England is the one we talk about the most, although Heart of Darkness is not British owned, about a British owned territory. Other countries owned smaller countries. The countries that were owned and dominated were colonized by the white people, tended to be white Europeans, and they knocked out native populaces or controlled and enslaved them and reorganized the entire structure of the culture that they found. Postcolonialism looks at the very specific relationship that colonization caused and its long-term effects. When we talk about how to understand postcolonialism, I always talk about England because it used to be said that the sun never set on the British Empire. So if the sun was rising somewhere, it was rising on a country owned by England. And they've given them back piece by piece over time. But I mean, you could pretty much go right around the globe and England owns something. They still own a lot of stuff. There's a lot of British principalities that you don't realize. Heart of Darkness is not about a British-owned place. But the politics at play were actually worse. So it was Belgian-owned. And essentially because the king in question who owned this little part of Africa was such a small-time king in Europe, none of the big boys at the big boy table in royal monarchies wanted to talk to him or cared about him. They were sort of very dismissive of him. And because of that, Leopold... Great guy. He wanted to show that he was a king of equal standing with other monarchs. And so he overplayed the colonization hand. Overtly violent. You didn't always necessarily see overt violence with colonization. You saw incidental violence, like I put practices A, B, and C in place, and if you don't obey them, the consequence is violence, and A, B, and C were policies that would have been really hard for native peoples to abide by. So violence will be a result. And it'll be a fairly natural result, and it'll be a fairly common result, but it's not like you were go out there and kill people. Leopold pretty much went out and said, go cut people's hands off and other acts of extreme brutality. Heart of Darkness is the fascinating look at the madness of the colonizers and their sort of desperation to prove that they're better than other people, when in fact they're not. The viciousness and sort of animalistic nature of ownership, it rots the people that have it, as much as it hurts the people that they're doing it to. And should you like Heart of Darkness, and there's always a group of you that really like Heart of Darkness, I hate it. It's like a 70-page book that takes every ounce of my dedication to get through. I will say that having taught it now a few times, and I'm on my 6th reread of it, I do find it less tedious. I am more prone to seeing the beauty of the piece and the importance of the piece. I still hate it more than I hate almost any other book I teach in this curriculum. But I left it on the curriculum, even though I could have taken it off, because it really is significant for post-colonial literature, and at 70 pages, even if you have to hurt yourself to get through it, it doesn't take that long. Post-colonialism is really centered in a historical relationship that doesn't pretty much exist anymore, except one way I always taught it that you guys didn't get to experience is the fact that we're trying to colonize Mars. So you would think that we've reflected on all of these sort of failed colonial experiments, like they haven't worked. They have always harmed more than they've helped. And in many cases, we can never undo the damage that we did. And yet one of our big goals is colonizing Mars. And as of like September, I would have taught that with just Elon Musk. There's technically 2 other people trying to do it, but like really, Elon Musk is the only true name in the game right now. And yet, we have since established Space Force. So Space Force is going to take the colonization game to the moon and Mars. We're doubling down on interstellar colonization. I find this incredibly fascinating as a person who's like, we were meant to have learned the historical lesson and we kind of refuse to. And we assume a change of venue is going to change outcome. I have a game design that we didn't get to play this year where I make you Martian colonizers. And it usually brings out the absolute worst in people. Occasionally it brings out the best. There's always one group that does so well in making little Martian utopias, and pretty much everyone else is varying degrees of like dog eat dog dirty politics. As you are kind of considering the various things that we perhaps didn't always get to this year, I hope that you kind of reflect on what we did learn with some joyfulness and maybe some curiosity to go back over some of the less traveled territory in the future in college, because the likelihood of you having a Lit Theory 101 course in college is really high. It's like 98% certainty. Some of you may even find that you could use some of the essays from my class to get course credit in that, depending on your college's specific standards for giving credit. As we head forward into Wednesday, and you get my final remarks on the class, I would just like to remind you guys that I think one of the greatest things that you could have done with your time here is ask important questions, not only to me, but to yourselves. And that the point of studying books in these schools of thought was not necessarily to be given concrete answers about which ones of them were right, but to come up with that answer on your own and to say, I feel like this one's right. I feel like this one's right. I feel like this one's wrong. I wanted very badly for you guys to get as well-rounded an experience with that as you could, so that it ended with you making decisions about how you felt. And I do think my maternity leave threw you guys off your game a little with that, and I do apologize. And not sorry. Very pleased with the baby. He is an upgrade from the other one in terms of sleep and general happiness. But I really want you guys to think happily about this time. I'll put closing remarks up on Wednesday, and otherwise, have a good day.